When I tell people that we were self-funded for 4 years, and I started thinking about this in 2015, and it's still roughly the same concept. It's not the same concept, but the same company, a very much bigger evolution of the same company, and it's now 2023. They're like, how did you keep going? I was just like, I am willing this into existence. I know the ideas that I have here are incredibly useful to the industry, because everyone I tell it to, they're like, hell yes, I want that to exist. So, and I grew up surrounded by technology in the creative industries, so I need to dedicate my life to making technology in the creative industries way better.
Welcome to another episode of Big Risk Energy. On this podcast, we talk to an amazing range of people. We talk to these people about risk. Risk they've taken in their lives, risk they've taken in their careers, when they paid off and when they didn't. And on this episode, I'm blessed to be joined by the one and only Gabriel Isserlis. Isserlis? Isserlis. Do you know, it's crazy. It's something to do with dyslexia and ADHD. It's just the perfect combination for butchering words that I don't recognize initially. But as someone with a equally unusual name, or uncommon name, I should say, this is something we're used to, right?
Yep. And I also butcher my own name because I have dyslexia as well. So I butcher my own name quite often, and then I butcher the name of my university, which is very long all the time.
Okay.
Rochester Institute of Technology, and I just
can't get the words right.
I trip over it every time. Institute, I struggle with that.
It's funny, right? I mean, we're both, at least semi-intelligent human beings, but there's just these words which, the neurodiverse brain just can't handle, which is interesting. So what I also find interesting is I see a lot of positive correlation, let's say, between neurodiversity and creative ability as well. Obviously, you are an incredibly creative individual. Would love to learn more about your journey in music, where that started. But do you also see that the neurodiversity part plays a role in that creativity?
Yeah, definitely. I guess I haven't spent enough time kind of analyzing that and really researching that to have very fixed thoughts on it. But it is, my dad is, all my family are musicians. Mm-hmm. My entire family are classical musicians, and yes, some of them are definitely neurodiverse.
Yeah, okay.
There's examples of it all over the world. There's loads and loads of neurodiverse people who come up with the most creative, incredible ideas. So.
I think it's because it's the just constant requirement to view things slightly differently.
I was going to say that,
just as a survival mechanism, right? Yeah. So therefore, when you apply that into a space where you don't have the same rules and regulations, obviously that can lead to some really interesting things. So you come from a family of classical musicians.
Yes.
Tell me more about that. What does that mean?
So
my professional
classical musicians. My dad is a cellist. My mum was a flautist. I have two aunts, two uncles who are professional musicians. My now wife is a professional musician. My dad is a soloist, so he travels around the world and plays with different orchestras. Mm-hmm. My wife is a leader of a quartet, which is very similar to a startup, actually. She's been working on it 8 years, and then they kind of found product market fit this year.
Interesting. Okay.
With quartet terms. And they're doing incredibly well now.
That's great.
And then, my grandfather was a amateur violinist. My grandmother was an amateur pianist. My great-grandfather was a composer and musician.
Wow.
And there's just a massive history of music in my family.
That's fascinating. Yeah. And what do you think that comes from? Is that just the case of, it's in the family business, and therefore there was great opportunities for introduction to the space, or is it just a total creative streak?
I think there might be a creative streak. Like I don't know exactly where it came from. It seems to jump a generation as well, because my grandparents, they were amateurs, I believe. At least my granddad was. He was a scientist but an amateur violinist. And his dad was the professional and his son and it was kids. And now I am not a professional musician. So it's like, every second generation. But I knew music. I knew how to understand and read music before I knew how to understand and read English.
Wow.
So like it was like just pumped into my veins from day one. Like there's videos of me sitting next to my dad and listening to him practice from less than a few months old.
Wow.
And I've always had a bedroom like really close to the music room, and I just all the time I hear it. So it was just, it was pumped into my veins kind of. But I don't know. Of my generation, one cousin has gone into music and another has gone into law and another, myself, gone into tech. But all three of us do play musical instruments at pretty decently high levels. I would be better if I practiced, but I don't have time to practice.
Right, yeah. Being the entrepreneur is enough of a full-time job, let alone being a cellist.
I am quite good at sight reading, which is something I was taught as a kid. So it very much frustrated my dad and my wife earlier this year when I picked up a cello after not touching it for 12 months, and I sight read a piece with my dad, and I didn't hit all the notes, but I hit most of them, enough to the point that they were like, I wish you were worse.
Wow.
Because they would like get you to practice more.
Yeah. It's really interesting, actually, the point you make about it skipping a generation. And I can't remember which psychotherapist was talking about this, but there's the idea that often the children are looking to complete or excel in areas where maybe the parents didn't excel in as much. So you see it a lot with very successful businessmen, and then who have totally denied creative, spiritual element in their lives, and you see the generation beyond that then go down a very spiritual route. They don't want to be involved with business and money, and it's really, really interesting. I see it a lot with that generational skip.
For me, I think I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder, which I try and ignore, but so much of my childhood was defined by my dad because I started cello when I was 5. He was a cellist, or is a cellist. And when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, I'd be going to music camps. People would recognize my last name, and they'd be like, oh, you're related to him. And when I was 12, I got the comment, oh, you're related to him. I expected you to be better. Oof. I'm like, I'm 12.
Jesus. That's pretty brutal.
So I was, like, a lot of the time I was defined by him. Like, it wasn't intentional. It's just how the world works. And so when I started coming up with ideas for companies, I was like, oh, this is a way that I can kind of still be true to my family, heritage of music and the creative industries, but I can do it in my own way, and I don't have to mention my dad's name. My last name gets recognized once in every 6 months or something like that when someone's a fan of classical music, and I'm like, yeah, that's my dad.
Okay, that's really interesting. And so with that in mind, it was still always going to be a case of, even if not going down the route of being a professional performer, you still knew that you wanted to exist within the world of music.
I knew I wanted to exist within the world of the creative industries.
Okay.
Well, I guess, I've gone through a lot of different things, actually, so I'm not sure about that. When I finally started finding my feet is when I was like, okay, creative industries is definitely my strong point, and I love it. I'm super passionate about it, but I didn't know in what angle. So when I was a kid, when I started being told they expected me to be better, I was like, okay, so what else is there in the world? And I dabbled in the idea of becoming an architect because I love building things. I have a very visual memory. I can remember places incredibly well. Like when I was a kid, I would go on holiday places and I'd come home and I'd draw layouts of
that's
floor plans of the place from memory. Oh, not exactly to scale, but I'd get most things on point, and then I'd take the floor plans back the next time.
That's
and I'd be
amazing. I mean, that's genuinely incredible. As someone who really struggles with visualization, I literally cannot imagine having that level of photographic memory.
Except it's only for places. If I look at people, I can't recognize anyone. I've had conversations with people where I describe this amazing person that I've met, and I've suddenly realized it's the person I'm talking to that I'm describing.
Well, that I do resonate with. That I understand completely. Okay, that's really interesting. So you were exploring that route, but then ultimately, because you're a filmmaker for a while as well.
So
right?
yeah, that was 16-ish when I was just like exploring architecture, and I can't remember exactly what my mum told me about studying architecture, but it put me right off.
Okay.
Because she'd studied architecture, and I was like, "Oh, I don't want to do that." And then I got really, really into films, but like not watching the actual films. I had the extended Lord of the Rings behind, like massive, I think 19-disc DVD set. And obviously 6 discs were the 3 extended movies, but the other 12, 13 discs were the behind the scenes of everything that they did to make those movies.
Wow.
And I would watch those endlessly, like audio commentaries, deep dives, and I was like, wow, filmmaking is incredible. I also did that with the Harry Potter movies and definitely Star Wars at some point, but loads of big movies.
Yeah.
I'd watch the movie a couple times, and then I'd watch all the behind the scenes.
You're really
like,
getting into the thick of it.
Yeah.
Ironically, 3 film franchises that I've never seen. Really
amazing.
Yeah.
Okay,
well, I mean,
should.
I've watched the first one of all of those, but I don't know. For me, it just weirdly, because I love sci-fi. I don't like fantasy. To be fair, I've never been a fan of fantasy. I do love sci-fi. 2001 is probably my favorite film, but I just could never get into Star Wars. I don't know why.
Okay. Well,
but I haven't tried it for so long.
You
like,
could try again.
there is part of me that feels like I should re-engage with it because, you know, so many people can't be wrong. But it just never worked for me.
I mean, they can be, but
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot of examples of that. Anyways, there's actually the most recent Star Wars series that was absolutely brilliant, and you didn't need to know anything about the Star Wars world, is Andor on Disney Plus.
Oh, Disney Plus, fine. Okay.
You should check that out.
All right, I'll give it a go.
Yeah.
I will make that commitment, and I will let you know.
It's good quality television without the Star Wars bit, but it happens to be in the Star Wars universe.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, so I was fascinated by film, and I decided to get a film degree. And I did some filming at high school, made a silly stop-motion film, which was very fun and took way too long, called Blue, which is, I think it's still on YouTube or Vimeo. But yeah, if people go to my personal website,
maybe we
they
can link
watch
it here.
Yeah.
Here it is. Press the button in the corner.
And that and some grades of mine got me accepted into my university, which was Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York. And
did you want to go to that university specifically, or did you just want to get out of the UK for university? What was the thinking?
I'm an only child, so I wanted to get away from home to show that I could live on my own.
Yep.
I went to the American school in London, the high school.
Okay.
And so the natural follow-on from American high school was American University. And I applied to a bunch of places. RIT is the only place that does hands-on filmmaking. So when you first get there, instead of studying any theory about this is how someone made a movie and this is why it's amazing, they said, here's a Bolex 8mm film camera. Go and make a movie with that. And we actually, I don't think they do that anymore, but when I went there, we had to splice film. We were based in the same city as Kodak, so our film got processed by Kodak and then sent back to us.
That's cool.
And it was a really, really cool introduction into how films used to have to be made.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of appreciation for the slow, methodical work of filmmaking with splicing and taping film together that
does not exist
does
anymore.
not exist for most movies anymore.
Sure.
So yeah, I went into film studies and I worked on that. I got my degree in film, so I have a degree in filmmaking. But near the end of that degree, I realized that I'm a very passionate person about how film is created, but I'm not very good at making films myself.
Okay.
Retrospectively, I figured out why, which is filmmakers have this incredible ability of having an end date to their project, and everything has to be done by that end date, and they hand it off and it is done. They're not allowed to touch it anymore.
Yeah.
At least big time filmmakers, unless you're George Lucas, but yeah.
Sure.
And I don't work that way. I work like a founder. I work iteratively. I put something out. I get feedback on it. I iterate. I put something out, and that doesn't work with film.
It's interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't work with film. I think one of the things that I found very interesting with this is not exactly the most current thing, but the big move from, traditional consumption of music to Spotify and other streaming services, for example, was the way that artists were then able to start iterating and almost rewriting, art that they released. I think one of the first really high-profile case of that was The Life of Pablo, which was the Kanye West album from 2016. And they were talking about this release date in the way that you're talking about. And then there was like 8, 9, 10 iterations of that album released daily after he initially released it, with different track listings and verses getting changed, which I thought was really, really interesting. And I think it's not something which is utilized enough in streaming and music right now, although it was at that time, it seemed to be quite popular. But yeah, you're right, with film, that's not possible.
Yeah.
Once it's out, right?
I mean, to a point, there's a few cases of, like, I think Marvel films and other films where they've released and then they've been like, oh, we need to add like a post-credit scene, or we need to change something.
Yeah?
Really, there's a few, very, very few cases of that, but I think that I've read cases of that. And there's also there's audience testing, which is a level of that, but that comes at the very end of the process. Once the film is mostly there, then you do audience testing. So there's a Jackson Pollock line in the original Guardians of the Galaxy, which is hilariously mistasteful, but it's hilarious. And apparently they were going to cut that, and then it just received amazing audience testing responses. So they were like, okay, never mind, we're putting it in.
Yeah.
So there is an element to that in film, but it's the filmmaker has to do most of the filming. They don't release the previs and like the.
I wonder how much generative AI is going to change that, right? You
Yeah.
create the trailer first, do the audience testing, and then actually film it based on, the response to the trailer, right?
I really hope that's not how it goes.
Oh, of course. We've got to hope not. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a matter of time, right?
There's going to be. I think there's also going to be a pushback in a lot of, like, there was a concern. I heard this interesting comment the other day. There was a concern when photography came out that painting would no longer be relevant.
Okay.
And the person making this argument said that, I can't remember who was making this, but they basically said the same is going to be with AI. Is, yes, loads of people will use AI as a tool, and it'll be great. But there will be some people who appreciate the older standard.
Yeah.
And they will stick to it, and there will be loads of consumers who love that.
100%. It's the same reason why vinyls still sell.
Yes.
Right?
In fact, vinyl's doing better than...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, of course it will. I think that is the reality of the case. I think where it does get really interesting is the current Screen Actor Guild protests going on at the moment. I would say that's probably the first very, very public example of AI or counter AI protests.
Yeah.
Maybe protests is a bit of a strong word to use, at least demonstrations.
Yeah.
But these are obviously people with reputations to uphold and everything else. As soon as that trickles down into other industries where maybe they don't have the same level of scrutiny as actors do, the same level of publicity that actors do, I think that's a very interesting indication of the future of anti-AI demonstrations going industry to industry. And I think within 12 months from now, we'll see the first anti-AI riots, depending on which industries they impact. But it feels like an inevitability at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's how... Yeah, as a young entrepreneur who obviously I'm constantly dabbling in AI, I'm like, okay, I'm aware I need to use this in good ways, and I need to build this into my technology, but it shouldn't define us. It should be a tool that I use to help solve a problem that my users are having. And how do I do it in a way that is respectful of our users, but also like moves our technology like leaps and bounds forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the great thing about your business from a defensibility perspective is obviously, although you're utilizing technology to bring people together, ultimately you're still exploring physical real world places. Yeah. And that's something which AI cannot, at least for now, really mess with. So I think that's very strong.
Yeah, post fundraiser in my plans, I even have like specific types of content that we want to like invest into that cannot be replicated by AI because they are based on real world experience.
Okay, go on.
Well, I don't want to give the game away too
Fair
much.
enough, yeah.
But basically, it will be one piece of content will be reviews on theater shows. Like, and you can't send an AI to go and do a review on a never digitized theater show.
Yeah. So, okay, nice. That's cool. That's really good. That's good. And I think from like an SEO perspective, having those areas of content where it cannot be replicated in that way, that's a really nice winning strategy.
Yeah. So I think we have 3 different key ideas like that are things that are useful for the sector or interesting to the sector, but cannot be replicated by AI because like half the articles can be written by AI if we really get to that point, and like our copywriters want to do bits and bobs of like half AI, half human, but it still requires a human experience in the first place to inspire the article.
Very cool. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's get back to your story on that side. So you've come to the conclusion that filmmaking is not for you.
Yep.
When do you then say, okay, well, I'm now going to pivot into technology?
So during my film degree, when I realized that film was maybe not for me, I then was like, okay, what is for me? I love building things. I love technology. I am an early adopter. I used to buy a load of stuff on Kickstarter. I had the original Pebble smartwatch. Actually, all generations of that. I own a Google Glass.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's niche.
I couldn't quite acquire a what was it, the Microsoft HoloLens, but my friend did, so we used that together.
I've used the HoloLens. Actually, really, really cool. Yeah.
So I love early stage tech. And I've always been passionate about it and interested by it. So I decided to get a programming degree as well. And I got a degree at RIT, which is Web and Mobile Application Development, which is basically I learned basic web coding as well as Swift. Is it Swift? For iOS and Java, so for Android. And I did basic levels of that. I also learned during that degree, I'm not very good at coding.
Okay.
But I just don't have the patience for it. I have a level of dyslexia, so I miss a lot of things.
Yep.
I'm very good at spelling for someone with dyslexia, but I miss everything else. So,
that actually makes sense, right? Yeah. Because we just memorize the word rather than read the word. So we memorize the letters. We don't actually read them. So when we're seeing something which isn't already in the bank of memorized images, then it's it's a free for all.
Exactly. That was a great way of explaining it. So, I also have not a strong level of ADHD, but I have a level of ADD. So it makes it very hard to get into those long programming sessions and just stare at lines of code.
Yeah.
So I got most of that degree, and I really love programming. I love kind of coming up with concepts that need programming for them, but I'm very good at coming up with the concepts and then telling someone else how to implement it. And
good skill for a founder.
Yep. And in 2015 or so, I don't know what clicked. I worked at the tech crew on university, so I was involved in every event or most events on campus, which tech crew basically meant we did the sounds, the lights, and the power and the staging for every event on campus, whether it was a small club event for 10 people, but we also had a massive stage, so we hosted Maroon 5, Macklemore, Snoop Dogg, like Bob Dylan, big names.
No way.
And I worked on shows with them.
That's cool.
So I saw the whole gamut of event planning as well. And it was some combination of event planning, music, film. I also worked as a photographer and programming. All of that mashed up in my head. I started coming up with ideas. I was like, these industries all have the same problem, but very few people are in all 3 of those industries. And even fewer people have programming knowledge to realize that there's a simple way to build this. And I kept coming up with idea after idea after idea for that exact description. And I was like, okay, well, got these ideas. How do I make a company? So I spent quite a while in my bedroom trying to figure out how to start a company.
I think it's interesting because what you're getting to there is something that I always advise any founder to really, really think about when they're building a company, which is don't fall in love with the solution, fall in love with the problem. right? Because the solution and the way that we get there is always going to iterate and optimize and change. You have to really love the problem and love the space, which clearly you do.
Yeah.
So how long did it take you from that mishmash of ideas and concepts and possible businesses to actually then starting building something which you thought, okay, this is it? What did that look like for you?
It took me a long time. I moved back home and spent a lot of time in my bedroom trying to come up with ideas, or trying to not come up with ideas. I had loads of ideas how to implement them. So I came up with a spreadsheet, which I still have somewhere, which is every single idea that I had that all fit under this one roof of the intersection of creativity and technology.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 150 ideas long, and every single one of them could be in a business. I got absolutely nowhere trying to figure it out myself. And this was 2016. I was also very active on Facebook, which luckily I'm not anymore, dealing with all of the fun votings that were happening at that time.
Right. I didn't know if you meant, because for me, 2015, 2016, that was one of the most amazing periods of time in terms of getting significant traction on social platforms organically.
Yeah.
Right. So that was when I was running RealSport, which I think I told you about last time we spoke. And then, you could release some content, put zero budget behind it. And if you got lucky, 12.5 million views. I mean, it was a crazy time. So I didn't know if you were exploring that side, more down the rabbit hole of politics.
Yeah. What we did like test the idea. I was involved in a lot of groups at that time on Facebook.
That was it. Groups were so powerful at that time.
And I did constantly tell people about my ideas and ask them for feedback. So I was talking to not only my friends, all of my friends, except for the programmers, every single one of them is in like the creative industry. So I had a massive test market just in my own network.
Great.
So I talked to friends, I talked to people on Facebook, and I was also working odd job photography and theater jobs, and I was telling everyone about this weird company called DBMA, which was the first name of it, which stood for Database of Music and Artists. It was IMDb for music. That was the original concept that I was like, okay, this is an okay one. Let's go with that. Turns out there are multiple of those. There's Discogs and a couple others.
Yep.
And the original spark that led me down the route to where I am today was thinking, okay, if I was to build this, how would I get better data than them? Because there's a lot of actors and musicians who I know who said that their database online sites are cool in theory, but a lot of their data is just wacky.
Yeah.
So I thought, how do I get better data? I built something that's useful, a tool that people would enjoy using. And around the same time, I went into a program called Founder Institute, which is an incubator program, and it was 2018, early 2018 when I went into that. So I'd spent a lot of time faffing. But I went into Founder Institute and they said, love all your ideas, but what you're trying to build is like the size of Amazon. Start with one thing.
Yes.
So they helped me narrow down my ideas by talking to customers saying, okay, we have these 3 ideas. One was a fintech. I can't actually remember exactly what it was. One I simply cannot remember, and one was Airbnb for music rehearsal spaces in people's living rooms. And we pitched those ideas to a lot of customers. Everyone was excited about the last one. So I was like, okay, I'll try and figure out how to build that. It took me a long time. We had about 5 false starts where we built something and then realized that actually people using it would have a terrible experience, so probably people wouldn't use it. So we talked to a lot of people. We had venues lined up before we had a website. We had customers lined up before we had a website. I wish I'd spent more time doing that.
Yeah.
But, you live and learn.
So let me just jump in here on this part, because I think this is something which, I'm really passionate about with the podcast in terms of, amplifying stories where people can take inspiration from them. So bringing yourself back to that point, 2018, Founders Institute, you spent 2 years working on this idea and you're still formulating things and it's still, pre-product, everything else. Where are you mentally at that time, and how are you finding that you're staying engaged?
Yeah.
How are you finding, especially as someone who's impatient, ADHD, dyslexic, I get it completely, right? How are you finding at that stage saying like, no, like let's keep on hammering away at this, even though it's not going as quickly as probably you'd hoped at that time?
Yeah. Well, everyone who said heard that I was working on a startup, they were like, oh, startups, they explode and they're amazing. And I had a lot of people come in, work for me for a bit, like help with things, and then be disappointed by how slow it was going and leave. And that was tough. Like, that is tough.
It is.
You have to have someone in your life who is supporting you. It doesn't have to be a co-founder. I had co-founders at the time, but we parted ways amicably. They're still shareholders, but they, like, small shareholders. They didn't have the, like, it wasn't their idea. I ended up putting money into the business. They didn't. And they didn't have the time or the resources to dedicate themselves as much as I did. So we parted ways amicably, but I had them as supporters. One of the reasons they still have equity is because they supported me when almost no one else did.
Fine.
But
and that makes sense.
Yeah. There was so them. That was very, very helpful because they were like, your ideas are amazing. They need to be in the world. Keep going. That was, I think, something that Chuck said once. And then I had my dad, luckily, who's very supportive in his own way. And he was happy to support me any way he could. Letting me live in his flat was one of them. And then I got lucky and I started dating an amazing person around the same time that I started working on Tutti. And she was incredibly supportive. So she was still in university in the Guildhall School of Music at the time. But she was, at some point, she got fed up with coming home and asking me if I'd done any work on my startup, and me being like, no, I spend all the time on Facebook and Netflix. And she was like, okay, you're either going to do this or you're not.
Yeah, which is fair.
Which is fair. Yeah. So she helped build a work ethic that I never had before.
Wow.
And now I have a ridiculous work ethic. So even on the worst days, I will get myself out of bed before 9 and I'll
That's
crack on with
amazing.
things.
That's amazing. Genuinely, I think that's that is the sign of a real partnership.
Yeah.
As well. But yeah, it's and I'm actually so happy you said that, because there are people who I speak to who, if they don't have a work ethic and they feel resigned that they'll never have a work ethic, but that's a great example of that. No, you can unlock that part of yourself with the right support and everything else. I think that's a fascinating part. I'd love to learn more about that.
Yeah, I guess I didn't journal at the time, which I kind of wish I had. So I don't know how quickly it progressed, but I do know when I came back from university, I was sitting in my room playing Halo and watching Netflix and being on Facebook and occasionally writing down ideas on my spreadsheet.
Sure.
And I evolved that to 2019, where every single day I would get out of bed early and I would try and make this company a reality. And somewhere in the middle, it did take years. It took years. And I can't believe how quickly time has passed since I graduated university. But at the same time, it's really weird as well, because when I left university, I had loads of friends in software engineering. They've all gone into these amazing tech companies, and I saw them doing brilliantly, getting promotion after promotion, making loads of money. And here I was in my bedroom making just enough money to survive with my side gigs, and being incredibly depressed and jealous of them. And now when I talk to those same people today, they're like, wow, you've built something out of nothing that massive companies, including the BBC, have used. And that is incredible. So it's anyways.
It's a testament to perseverance.
Yes,
right?
it is really very much perseverance. When I tell people that we were self-funded for 4 years, and I started thinking about this in 2015, and it's still roughly the same concept. It's not the same concept, but the same company, a very much bigger evolution of the same company, and it's now 2023. They're like, how did you keep going? I was just like, I am willing this into existence. I know the ideas that I have here are incredibly useful to the industry, because everyone I tell it to, they're like, hell yes, I want that to exist. So, and I grew up surrounded by technology in the creative industries. So I need to dedicate my life to making technology in the creative industries way better.
And I think, again, this is another amazing example of why it's so important to genuinely fall in love with that problem. You know, if you were doing this because actually you see an opportunity rather than actually this is something you want to solve, maybe the perseverance isn't there. Maybe the desire to will this into reality isn't there. So I think that's why when you find your purpose, and maybe purpose is too strong for this, I don't know, you can tell me, but when you find something which genuinely ignites that passion, say, no, this needs to exist, that's how you do it, right? You focus on that.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. I always had loads of different taglines and missions and ideas of why I was doing it and what I care about and what the big mission is. And it wasn't until after my crowd raise last year that I actually figured out a simple way of explaining it, which is we want to give creators more time to create. That is it. I spent a lot of time working in the creative industries and watching my fellow creative friends just waste so much time on admin and tangential things to the creative process. And people get into the creative arts to create, not to do admin.
Yes.
Unless you're an arts administrator, but fair, yeah. And they get frustrated by the amount of admin that is between inspiration and execution.
Yeah.
So
and flipping between the two is so difficult.
Yeah.
As well, right?
Yeah.
You know, you need to protect that creative energy.
Yeah.
Doing the admin side is so antithetical to that. It's
Yeah,
almost
it
soul
drains.
destroying.
It's creatively draining. I haven't found a good way of putting that phrase into the tagline, but it is quite literally it drains your creativity doing that admin. So what we want to do is automate or simplify any of that creatively draining admin and just give people more time to create. And we are using all sorts of different technologies to do that. But yeah, we've kind of jumped around a bit.
Of course. That's what I expect.
Yeah.
People with ADHD having a conversation. What did you want? Something linear?
I haven't really explained what the business is, but yeah. Anyways.
No, go for good opportunity. Tell us how it works.
Yeah, so I guess I can jump back talking about nonlinear. The idea in 2018 was Airbnb for music rehearsal spaces. We realized that was too niche really quickly. There's people love that concept and we still help people with that, but we were never going to make much money. The frequency isn't there. Or the bookings were £10 to £20 and you're not going to make, if you're doing 10% commission on a £20 booking, you're not going to make that much money. So we evolved it into Airbnb for creative space. So, and we also rebranded at that time to Tutti, which Tutti is a callback to my background. Tutti is written in every orchestra score, no matter where in the world you are. I've been in orchestras in China, in Vietnam, in Germany, in UK. Tutti is written above the orchestra score when the entire orchestra comes in. So it's all together. And I've always been passionate about kind of giving the company an ethos and a sense of all-togetherness, equality, supportiveness.
Nice.
And that name nailed it on being relevant to the industry as well as having that ethos. And in 2020, I think it was during the pandemic, we rebranded to the colors that we are today, which stand out. Like people were just like, you have too many colors. I'm like, no, it stands out from every other logo. It is perfect.
Yeah.
And two, each of the colors was chosen hilariously by us taking a color wheel and then taking the different disciplines that we supported, music, theater, dance, film, and photography at the time, and overlaying the color wheel to those disciplines, and then laying music to blue because music was our first one and blue was our first one.
Okay.
And then the other things were chosen.
So you've ended up with blue, red, green, purple, orange.
Yep.
Nice.
And they also, it's similar to the pride flag intentionally, but it's not the pride flag. Again, promoting equality and supportiveness and collaboration. Anyways, I got off track. So music, Airbnb for music rehearsal spaces becomes Airbnb for creative space. And that was 2019. 2020 hit, the pandemic hit, and we're dealing with in-person event spaces. And everyone was like, okay, just pivot to something online. We tested an online business for 2 weeks. We built a new website, got a couple hundred users in 2 weeks. And then we were like, we don't love this.
What was it?
It was Uber for creative skills. It's a terrible way of explaining it. It was basically Fiverr, kind of.
Okay.
So you could share your creative skills online, and people could pay you for your creative skills, but it was like acting, teaching, music teaching, voiceovers, stuff like that.
Makes sense. Fiverr for creatives,
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So made sense, but my passion, because of my passion in events at RIT, my passion is in-person events. And I'm very good at in-person events. Anyone who went to my wedding will tell me that. So we decided after 2 weeks, actually, no, in-person events are going to come back.
Sure.
So let's build our infrastructure technology during the pandemic and just be ready for a massive influx of events. And I worked full-time through the pandemic with 2 engineers in India.
Mm-hmm.
And we built the entire infrastructure that is running our site today. And I'm so glad we did that. It was very quiet. It was very nice. It taught me how to work with developers.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was... I mean, we had no bookings, but luckily we had no investors being like, what are you doing?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think you're right as well. There were lots of companies that I saw which, when you're at a certain stage of revenue, especially if you're venture backed, the decision to put your head under the parapet during COVID was not possible, right? You've got to pursue that growth anyway. And a lot of those companies made make or break pivots knowing that they would never be able to come back. But if you were at the really early stage at that time, especially as you said, no investor pressure, amazing time to build for the future.
Yeah. So we got lucky with timing on that. And we built the technology. Obviously, there was 3 of us, so we didn't build as fast as we would have liked, but
Sure.
We got the main technology there. And our tech now has been compared to companies with 100 times our funding as an equal.
Wow.
So, we did something right during that time. And then after the pandemic, in March 2021, we decided to turn on marketing back on, and we focused quite a bit on sales, and we grew from 200 listings to 1,000 listings in 5 months.
Amazing.
And we were like, great, we're doing well. Time to go fundraise.
Yeah.
We didn't get anywhere because I had no idea how to fundraise. But I did learn how not to fundraise, which was fun.
Well, that's always a good way, right?
Yeah. And we also learnt that in order to build a marketplace business, you're just going to have ridiculous amounts of funding, especially when you have competitors who are so well funded. So we spent a lot of time while we were fundraising talking to our customers, and we discovered that 90%, I thought it was through intuition, I thought it was probably going to be close to 50%, but from our polls, 90% of our venues had no software behind them. They have spreadsheets, Google Calendar, email, phone, and they receive bookings from 12 different websites.
Right.
And we said, okay, that seems like an absolute mess. How would you feel about us building, would you pay for software if we built it?
Yeah.
And the answer was overwhelmingly yes.
Yeah.
And then we started talking with them okay, what if we build this feature, this feature, this feature? We tested really bad examples of the questions. I actually asked much more active questions, but I can't remember them right now.
But for illustrative purposes, yeah.
Illustrative, yeah. And we had long conversations with every host that was willing to talk to us, which was about 20 at the time. And we did polls with another 50. And
I think it's a great model, by the way. I think one of the most successful uses of that type of model is OpenTable. What they did is amazing. Pure SaaS-enabled marketplace, required ridiculous amount of critical mass for the booking discovery to work.
Yeah.
But building that back-end table booking system, which they could then sell into these restaurants, and OpenTable is
I was on OpenTable's website today.
Yeah.
Because we're building a feature not dissimilar to one of theirs. And I was like, okay, ours isn't working perfectly. How does OpenTable do it?
Yeah. I mean, look, SaaS-enabled marketplaces are brilliant, and they it's a really amazing way of building strong recurring revenues whilst you're waiting for the marketplace model to work and take rate to really come into play. So I think it's a great way of doing it.
Yeah. And then the interesting thing with because I have all of the experience in the creative industries, I know how artists work, but we are actually building the software to start with for venues.
Mm-hmm.
But every time I look at the software, I'm like, this software could be so easily adapted to work for the other side of the market.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like our plan right now is to build for venues, because we're not going to do everyone at once. It's just too much.
Yeah.
We're getting it working for venues, but then we will use the baseline of that software and build similar software for artists.
Cool.
And we now describe ourselves, depending on who we're talking to, we describe ourselves as an operating system for the creative industries.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where we're going. We'll have SaaS for both sides. We'll have a marketplace combining them, and we're going to have a bunch of tools around that as well. So there's a lot coming.
Yep.
But we're, B2B SaaS-enabled marketplace for venues and creators right now.
Love that. Okay, that is a perfect segue then into the last part of the show, which is 5 questions I ask every guest who comes on. What's the single biggest risk you've ever taken, and what was the outcome?
Outcome hasn't been seen yet, but investing my own money into this business.
Yeah.
I did that for a while. I was in a very, very fortunate position to have a bit of money.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that not everyone is in that position, but I lucked out, and instead of holding on to it and putting it into a secure savings account, well, I did that for some of it, but I set aside quite a lot to get this company off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And we will see in a few years if that was a wise choice or not. But we got to the point where we really had traction and could prove that people wanted this,
Mm-hmm.
because I think at the point that we did our first fundraise, we had over 500 people had already used it.
Okay.
So
there's good traction there.
there was decent traction.
Yeah.
And now there's even more, and it's just, it's growing. So yeah, biggest risk was that.
Nice. Okay, that's a good one. I think as entrepreneurs, that's one of the biggest indicators of belief to the market as well. And from my perspective as an angel investor, whenever I've got a founder who's invested their own, obviously so much of their time, energy, sweat, blood, tears, all the rest, but when they've also got skin in the game in that way, it's powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, what are you proudest of?
Does it all have to be about the company?
No, these are totally open-ended. We've had the total spectrum of answers to these questions.
I guess I'm, not to sound like arrogant, but I'm quite proud of my personal evolution
Mm-hmm.
as an individual, because as a teenager, I was just this super awkward kid who didn't want to talk to anyone. In university, I was very outgoing, but lacked all of the confidence in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I could never have more than 5-word conversation with girls. And it's in part thanks to my wife that I have gained so much confidence recently, but it's in part thanks to Tutti. It's in part thanks to being self-aware and working on myself. I knew that I was not good at public speaking, so I put myself out into public speaking situations.
Great.
And I am just generally, I do a lot of things to try and get myself into uncomfortable zones so that I can try and evolve, force myself to evolve.
That's awesome.
And the one thing that I'm still missing that I still need to do better is exercise more. But I will get there. So yeah, I'd say
that's an awesome answer. That's a really good answer. Okay, my next one for you is there anything you wish you did differently?
Yes, so much. But I
love the honesty.
Also don't want to. I do my best not to live in the past.
Yeah.
So, but if I was to look back, I would have gone into an incubator earlier. I would have done Founder Institute back in 2016 rather than
So
2018.
you found that program really useful?
Yeah, incredibly useful. I now mentor for it, and I mentor for Techstars and a couple other programs like that because I found programs like that so useful, and I want to mentor people or to support people the way that the best mentors at those programs mentored me, which is really actionable. Like, I like this. This doesn't make sense. Have you thought about doing this? Stuff like that, really quick.
Great.
So yeah, I do. So Founder Institute, that's one. But also, I got the advice from people early on that I should go and work at a different small startup while I was coming up with the ideas for mine.
Okay.
I didn't do that, and I wish I had, because I would have learnt from the side seat what not to do, what to do, a few other things. I could have gotten really stuck in. The only benefit of not doing that is I can imagine I would have gotten really passionate about that one startup, and I may not have ever left to go and do my own. The same thing is true for, like, there are companies who have just blown up on YouTube who I knew about when they had less than 100,000 followers, and I did reach out to a couple of them and say, hey, can I come work for you?
Yeah.
Luckily, none of them replied because I imagine I would have stuck with them and I would be living a very different life. So it's not really regret. It's like...
It's an interesting thought experiment.
It's an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah. And it's one I have frequently as well, because I've never worked for anyone else. When we sold RealSport, we were acquired by a company called Gfinity, big gaming company, PLC. So it wasn't a startup, and it was very much run as a PLC. But I constantly think about, would I have gone further? Would I have done better? Would I be better served having spent 3 years at a really, really amazing high growth, massively venture backed startup just to see how they did it there? So it's I think it's an experiment we always have as founders, right? Because if you've got that growth mindset, that, we know that there are so many learning opportunities out there that we miss, but I think ultimately being in the hot seat ourselves is probably going to be the most value in terms of growth. Yeah.
True.
Okay. My second to last question for you is, what does it take to be successful?
I don't know yet.
It depends on your definition of success, right?
My definition of success, I have not achieved yet. My definition of success for me is not having to worry about money. I still worry about every time I get Deliveroo. Yeah. So it's not worrying about money. It's like not having to double check myself if I want to go and have a nice dinner. Yeah. Doesn't have to be super expensive. Doesn't have to be like Nobu or something, but like just a dinner out where I spend maybe £50 instead of £20. Yeah. I still have to almost always say no when that's an option because I don't have massive income right now. So my level of success is getting to that point where I'm not worrying too much. And then I've forgotten the question. What does it take to be successful? But I think, if that's it, financial security. Financial security, and then like I am hoping to start a family at some point. So having the ability to support that family and not worry that I can't make ends meet. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good one. A tough one as well, right? Because one takes you further away from the goal than the other, right? Yeah. Having the family makes it even harder. Yeah. I mean, I don't have kids. I don't know if I'll ever have kids. It's something which I would do, but also, I don't have that like burning, like I need to have kids. Yeah. But it's interesting because I think right now I can live very selfishly, and even though I'm comfortable, I know that if I lost everything, it wouldn't make a difference because I have no dependents. So I can imagine that having that family also creates that other level of psychological insecurity, concern, however you want to call it. So I think it's, part of the human condition, right? Yeah. One of the biggest problems we all face. I think the one thing that I should mention as well is that it's not just monetary freedom that I would strive for. It would also be time freedom. Yeah. Because right now, to get this off the ground, like I did go away from my wedding for 2 weeks, and everyone in the team stood up, got involved and really helped the company keep going, which was amazing. But I can't just like disappear for holidays every couple weeks or something. No. And I would like to get to the point where I have I cannot imagine like retiring or stopping working.
Yep.
But to have the flexibility to say, okay, actually I want to take a long weekend.
Yeah.
And then just buggering off for a bit.
Yeah. And I think it does get to that point. In my experience, normally sort of, you hit a certain level of organizational infrastructure and then you can have that. But what I found, for example, is almost having this like always working, but flexibly. So I'll take calls on a Sunday, but I might only work half of the day on the Monday or like whatever it might be. And I think it's, you find that balance over time, but it's...
I am close to that. I'm just not quite there yet because when I'm not working, I'm like, I could be doing this thing.
Oh, of course. That never stops, right?
Okay.
That never stops, yeah. Okay, my last one for you is a 15-year-old Gabriel walks in the room right now. What are you going to tell him?
I don't know. 15-year-old me was, I guess, stay curious would be a nice, simple one. Don't worry too much would be another one.
Mm-hmm.
There'd be a lot of little things. I wouldn't be able to say 2 words and leave it at that. I think, and be yourself, because I am unashamedly myself now. Like, people keep telling me you're doing things wrong, and I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I really don't. I am doing things my way, and I will continue doing things my way. Yeah. And you got this, like, somehow giving him confidence, because I didn't have confidence back then.
Yeah.
Also, actually, when I was 15, I was playing a lot of World of Warcraft.
Mm-hmm.
And while my parents didn't like it, it was very useful for me because it taught me social skills. It taught me like leadership skills because I would lead things, and it taught me how to touch type. And I think I got into World of Warcraft when I was 14, 15. So I would tell them to keep at it for a little while.
Nice. Okay. Great. Amazing. What do you want to plug?
Well, my company, which is Tutti. At the moment, we look like Airbnb for creative spaces. So you can find and book amazing spaces for film shoots, photo shoots, rehearsals, recordings, performances, exhibitions, anything creative. We have over 2,000 spaces across the UK, mostly in London. And anyone who has an amazing space and wants to accept any of those types of bookings can list with us for free. And we will help you get amazing bookings from all sorts of people.
And where can people find it?
www.tutti.space.
Amazing. Gabriel, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching the episode. And if you haven't subscribed, please hit subscribe below so that you can support the podcast and we can keep on bringing you amazing new guests. If you want to see the other amazing episodes in this podcast, click into our series section. As ever, if there are any other guests or topics you want us to explore, just let me know in the comments and we'll do our best to bring someone in.